Hey there, welcome to episode 26 of the FFS Talk audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this on May 23rd, 2024. It's about 1 o'clock as we begin. Another solo episode, by the way. Today's topic, news to me. While we will today speak about the trial of the century for this century, it is not about that trial. It is not about the politics, although identity does figure into the reporting side. But we're not commenting on either of the trials of the century to which I will be referring. More about methodology and where things appear to be headed. So let us begin. Hopefully wherever you found this episode, you have a description of the show notes. I'll read the summary. Some observations about modern news coverage, the nonstop news coverage situation, and cameras in the courtroom. The best time to be aware of the bias and incomplete reporting that we encounter today was a few thousand years ago. The second best time is now. So there you go. A couple of links. The first two are hopefully links you've heard about before. buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, a little shameless self-promotion. You do not have to buy me a coffee, but I do use the profile page. It's kind of a pain to edit, but I do use the page there to link to all of my audio programs. Ideally, there will be some more things added there. We'll be launching websites, which I've been talking about for way too long. That figures into not only the Let's Innovate for Vegas project set, but the Cafe Genius Impresarios startup that I've been talking about for the last 3 weeks. This will be week 4, I think. That's how math works. So you can go there and see links to those things. I use it to kind of connect everything together outside of my own website properties. You are welcome to buy me a coffee if you like, but you are not obligated to in any way. Same goes for Ko-fi.com, Ko-fi. I know it's coffee, but I want to emphasize that it's K, Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. Similar deal. I will likely, once I'm posting content to the primary point of publication, the websites that go with each of the programs I'm producing, I'll probably use the coffee site to post announcements about the launch of the sites and so on. So same deal. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to spend any money. They're just tools to help with outreach in other ways. I've kind of eschewed the legacy social media platforms. It's time to change it up. I have 3 Wikipedia links that are apropos. One I've referred to before. It is The Blind Men and the Elephant, or Blind Men and an Elephant. The title of the Wikipedia page. Essentially, it's a story, parable that features a few blind people. They don't have to be men. A few blind people have never encountered an elephant before. They encounter an elephant. Each gets to or somehow comes into contact with a part of the elephant, and then tries to describe what they've found later. So if you only touch the tusk, for example, if you read the Wikipedia page, if you only touch the tusk, you might think this creature is ivory, a big ivory beast. If you only touch the tail, you might think they're, I don't even know what you could come up with that. Having ridden on an elephant, don't hate me, in Thailand, I will say elephants are very unique beasts, and it would be an interesting experiment. But anyway, so the blind man and the elephant is interesting because the take home is people with a limited amount of information assessing a situation or an encounter with another thing may come away with a different version, even if they're all in the same room. Each may have a different version, different take, because they're each able to grasp or capture or consume a fraction of the available information, and they don't do an effective job of putting together the whole, so you end up with different pictures, right? The next article is the Club du Mas. It is also a Wikipedia page. I could probably have used the Goodreads which I usually do for books. The Club Dumas, you may have seen the movie, The Ninth Gate. I have not read the book. I was looking in the library to see if they have it, and they do have the book. They don't have the audiobook. Having seen the movie, probably reading the book would be more interesting than the audio version. I'm a fan of audiobooks, by the way. So the Club Dumas, or if you have seen the movie, The Ninth Gate, I don't want to spoil it, so I won't. But if you are familiar with The Ninth Gate and the nature of the mystery, the way it is solved, and the final outcome, then you would know how that's applicable to having multiple news sources reporting on the same thing, much like the elephant scenario, and coming up with a different summary, different outcome, different report. So the Club Dumas. I just watched The Ninth Gate again recently, not completely unrelated to this. I watched it the other day just because I find it to be an interesting movie. I think Johnny Depp did a fine job, as did all of the cast. So it's an interesting movie to watch, and strangely apropos. And finally, a link which I've also referred to many times in the past, motivated reasoning. This is where you cherry pick, where you sort of take your biases and capture other biases that align, and you come up with, it's like a confirmation bias, right? So you say, oh, I'm only going to listen to people, and I'm only going to read things, and I'm only going to sort of pay attention to the things that seem to align with what the outcome I think should be, so that my personal narrative aligns with what I want it to be, or my preconceived notion. So, motivated reasoning is fed really by skewed, biased, or otherwise filtered reporting in news media, and now we only have a more granular selection of quote-unquote reporting. So it could be trained journalists, or it could be casual YouTubers or TikTokers. And quite often, and by the way, this is a problem that I first encountered when I was at Salon.com. It was at the time a 10-year-old internet news publication, unabashedly left-leaning, but the addition of, we called it the letters feature, basically discussion comments, done much better in years since. But this was a whole new ballgame. But the concern initially was that people who were unqualified or not knowledgeable, or not free from bias, not trained journalists, not able to present a unbiased narrative, etc. Anyway, all these concerns from the professional writers and journalists who were contributing to the Salon.com online publication. So the initial reaction internally was, you're going to let anyone write their words and they will appear next to mine. And this was flabbergasting at the time. And in years since, I've realized that they were completely correct. So when the opinion of anyone is given approximately equal credence as the opinion of a subject matter expert or a professionally trained and experienced journalist who is able, hopefully, to filter out their own personal biases, or at least be transparent about them, and to take that into account, the way they ask questions, and I'm not saying professional journalists do this, they're supposed to. But if they're transparent, if pick your favorite reporter, if you know where they stand on a particular issue or on a political alignment, even if you don't know, it often comes out, especially in the performative presentations we find in TV news now, internet streaming, or YouTube, or online, whatever, right? Go to your favorite major news company, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, et cetera, and most of their online talent is exactly that. The journalists are out in the field, or coming on as a pundit now and then, or talking head, or rendering an opinion. Often they are former political actors and so on. So the formation of a narrative in the form of news reporting can take on some leaning, some bias, And it starts and ends with motivated reasoning. It doesn't always become apparent through direct statement, but it becomes apparent through comparative consumption, which is sort of what I'm going to be talking about today. And this is where the Club du Mas, which reminds me of there's a commercial, and I don't remember which one it was, but it shows a person sitting at a candidate interviewing or in some part of a job hiring interview process. So he's sitting in a chair across from another person sitting behind the desk. The desk has a nameplate, and it says, let's say it says Mr. Dumas, so the Club Dumas, same thing. So the candidate says, something, thanks, Mr. Dumbass. And the probably not new boss, new manager of this candidate says, it's pronounced Dumas. And that always made me chuckle. Anyway, let's begin. The trial of the century is a term, a word, a title, a label thrown around. The first time I heard it was back in 1995. I had just graduated from college. I was living in Silicon Valley, spending my days at work, working hard, hardly working, one of those. The O.J. Simpson arrest, the slowest car chase in history, I think it is, was taking place sometime in 1994, somewhere in the middle, 1994. It was an interesting time. I did not watch every moment on television, but you pretty much had to. The courtroom drama today is a real thing, actual prime time, and now available wherever you, whenever and wherever you consume anything, right? You can watch it on YouTube. You can probably watch TikTok court cases. The judges don't have to be real. All manner of celebrities are becoming judges, even Steve Harvey. I believe he's quoted somewhere as saying, I don't even have to know the law, which an astute observer might say, well, judges don't really have to know the law either. It's procedural. Anyway, depends on where you are in the legal infrastructure, I suppose. Anyway, so the judges in the courtroom, which are sets, they're sound stages that they're recording, they're creating, they're producing drama or comedy for daily consumption if you just can't get enough of reality. I don't know if anyone here is a fan of Judge Wapner in the People's Court back in the day. Doug Llewellyn. Rusty, what was the bailiff's name? Rusty. Rusty was the bailiff in the Charles Manson case where Charles Manson tried to jump over the defendant's table. And I think Rusty, what's his name? Rusty, it'll come to me. Got in the way or blocked him or something. He was, I believe, he was in the courtroom anyway. Yeah, fun fact. So yeah, where's Judge Wapner when we need him? He was a real judge, retired. The People's Court was kind of interesting, still a little bit contrived, but we have gone astray since. But people love courtroom drama, real or imagined. And it's fun fact number 2, the People's Court ended its run on television in 1993. So a few months, whenever it was, say a year later, slowest car chase ever, and then the trial of the century would begin January of 1995. Just can't get enough. So the trial of the century, most of us are familiar with through recent history, is of course what I'm referring to, the O.J. Simpson trial for a double homicide in Brentwood. Took place in Brentwood, California. The trial was in, where was it? It was San Bernardino County. Recently, especially with the death of O.J. Simpson, there have been a lot of, first of all, dredging up of old YouTube videos, a lot of recommended for you. Once you click on an O.J. related item, you're going to see, production by Road, you're going to see all manner of recommended videos. Thanks, YouTube. So even the likes of Alan Dershowitz, who has his own thing going on, was saying that the venue choice was a major factor, the demographics of the jury, etc. So would they have had the same verdict if the venue were closer to where the actual crime took place, and if the jury was made up of a representative sampling of the population? I believe his take on that was it would most definitely have been different, but Who can say? It's still being analyzed and dissected, discussed, debated today, from charges to procedures to strategies, especially of the prosecutors, to outcomes. Who got what they deserved? Who didn't? We all saw it though, right? We all watched it on TV every day, every minute of it, because it was a landmark trial of the century, a landmark case, completely televised. Although the jury was not televised at the time, that's I think that's pretty standard practice. But certainly, Judge Ito became a minor celebrity, famous or infamous, depending on your take. Johnny Cochran, of course, stole the show, and the Dream Team, all these things that entered the public consciousness, and it was a courtroom drama about real murder, not pretend. I won't say no actors, but definitely not pretend. Today we have another trial of the century. Aren't we lucky? Once again, a trial of the century, but for the first time ever in history, thanks President Ford, a former president facing various charges on trial. As we record today, the case just about to get to the closing arguments this week. So today's May 23rd. It was May 21st, Tuesday. The defense rested. The prosecution had already rested. That means they have ended their examination and cross-examination of witnesses, presentation of evidence, and so on. Given that it's a holiday weekend, Memorial Day, the judge moved closing arguments to, I believe, Tuesday. The court is not in session on Wednesdays and Fridays, so Tuesday after Memorial Day, closing arguments. I don't know if they've said whether the plan is to be done on Tuesday or to move maybe one argument on Tuesday and the other closing argument on Thursday. Then the jury will receive their instructions, and then they will begin deliberations, and then the world will wait. It's been an interesting time. There are no cameras in the courtroom, so quite the opposite. If we were to compare that aspect, the public awareness, or the ability for the public to be directly aware of events and personalities and drama in the courtroom, or actually probably more often the boring procedural that is a normal courtroom. I have to imagine that if the proceedings in the courtroom were televised, that there would have been more performance, but that's my own theory. There are many differences between the two trials aside from that. In this monologue, however, we're going to focus on the key differences, the lack of cameras in the courtroom, and then the way the reporting on these two very different court cases are actually sort of similar, and how this actually impacts general news. So these are two representative cases that I'm comparing today. I'm not really commenting so much on the cases themselves. I'm not here to suggest my thoughts on whether either of the defendants in either of these cases would have been, should have been, could be, should be, would be guilty or not guilty. I'm not on the jury. And really, that's something we lose in this narrative. The reason there is a jury, and the reason the jury is not consuming the news and watching the B-roll and hearing the commentary and the misinformation and whatever, is so that they can listen to the case as presented. The whole court process is, I'm sure there's a cool quote about this, is not necessarily about finding the truth, but it's about presenting a truth so that a jury of one's peers will come away with no reasonable doubt, will reach a decision beyond a reasonable doubt based on the evidence presented, not on their preconceived notions. That's why you voir dire a jury, and not on biased reporting. Let's be honest, the prosecutor and the defendant, the prosecution and the defense, the attorneys and so on, are absolutely biased, but that is very clear. There's no messing around. There's no question. Ethically, the prosecution must believe that the defendant is guilty, or they must not pursue the case. The defendant must believe that their client is not guilty, but will typically not ask them so that they have no ethical dilemma. They are there to present a defense because that is the law. They do not need to concern themselves with, in particular, with whether the client is their client, whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty. They must present a defense against the prosecution, which must believe that the defendant could be guilty or should be found guilty. So the ethics are a little unusual. It's why people are often upset to think that, why did you defend this horrible person? Because they are entitled to a defense. The defendant may or may not be guilty. And again, the defense attorney is well advised to not ask. Because once you know, you could be committing all manner of trouble in the courtroom. If your defense attorney knows you are guilty, well, they're probably best to leave the case. The charges that are over campaign interference, campaign finance issues, campaign interference with providing funds from a company and then falsifying the business records. In the state of New York treats this as a crime. There are some subtleties about what do you call it? I'm totally spacing on the word. It's when the term has expired, the statute of limitations. Thank you. I just said that to myself. I have no production assistant helping me here. The falsifying of business records may have a statute of limitations issue. The campaign finance issue, whether a law was broken there, is apparently based on, I'm not an attorney, it's apparently based on whether the business records were falsified to cover the transfer of corporate funds to what is essentially cover up, but sequestering of information, obscuring it from public view ahead of an election to benefit the candidate, to affect the outcome of the election. So those accusations, much hay has been made that there haven't been proper charges filed. I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, for today's monologue, it's more about the nature of the coverage, not the procedure, the procedural issues, because both trials are there are plenty of issues. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm not commenting as a legal scholar in any way. It's just more of what you read about. And here again, you may be reading heavily skewed, motivated reasoning from heavily biased reporting, or pundits, or whomever you're listening, whoever's in your ear. And no cameras in the courtroom. Again, dramatic impact, in my opinion, on the way people are reporting and the way people are paying attention. I don't have any data. I don't have any numbers on this, but I heard at least one news source that was probably obviously left-leaning, suggesting that people are not showing up, that people are not as interested as one might imagine they would be. I don't know where that imagination would come from. And I think on the right, on the pro-defendant side, if you will, I think the sentiment has generally been that people are supportive, whether they're showing up or not. And then I believe some of the commentary from the defendant himself has been that the supporters are being prevented from approaching the courthouse. So there's a he said, she said accounting. Without the courtroom cameras, we only have the cameras outside, and the cameras outside appear to be trained on the courthouse doors. The commentary issued, and then back to the studios, right? So reporting here is very different from the OJ trial timeframe, where cameras were trained on the judges, the judge and the attorneys, and the witness stand, right? You had. It was a full deal all day, every day, 10 months. The trial went till October, which we're going to get to right now. So the trial started in January 95. The case was brought. The charges were filed. The case was brought against O.J. Simpson, Orenthal James Simpson, if I recall correctly, sometime in the middle of 1994. I think it was July. It's in that Wikipedia page. So charges filed. Slowest car chase. He is arrested and all that. And the process begins and the trial commences in January of 1995. It was televised daily. I recall at the time, I remember the car chase. I was 1 year in Silicon Valley. I would be, where was I? I was working at Apple at the time. So I'd come home from work and you could watch the recap. The internet was literally just making an appearance. So I was literally working, not kidding, literally, whatever that word even means anymore. Sitting in Mariani 1 at my LC2 admin machine. I got an email from one of my college colleagues and he said, hey, have you checked out this thing, Mosaic, the World Wide Web? Have you seen this yet? And I checked it out over the slowest internet connection I've ever used since. And it was, I think there were like 10 web pages. So there was no real internet to speak of. So you basically had to go home or a pub perhaps or read the newspaper or like a print media. Print media was still around for the O.J. Simpson trial. Televised the news channels, talking heads. So the reporting was to be seen on television. There was not even a TiVo back then. I don't think a casual person would record. I guess at the time a VHS tape could hold 6 hours. I doubt very much people were recording 6 to 8 hours or more of broadcasts reporting daily of in the courtroom camera footage, and then somehow watching that every day. I just can't imagine that happened. So you would basically lean on the highlight reel. If you get home after, so I worked in California, obviously in Silicon Valley. So the court case was happening in California time, in my time zone. If you were on the East Coast or if you were in another time zone in general, getting the court case would have been after the fact. You'd come home from work or wherever you were, and you might be into the night. So you might be a day or two behind if you were really invested, or maybe you just catch the highlight of the highlight on the weekend, or who knows. So there were varying levels of access and attention paid. Like I said, people were almost certainly not recording. There was no TiVo. There was no online this or that. There were no YouTube clips. There were no YouTube commenters. There were no camera phones. It was a very old ball game. So any discussions that were happening in the workplace, at the water cooler, the old trope about why you can't work from home. So people were sitting at the water cooler or in a meeting or at the pub or playing racquetball or whatever they were doing. Like, hey, did you see yesterday's coverage of whatever? Did you hear what Judge Ito said? So all these became household names. Even Cato Kalin, I think he has a podcast with someone, and they recently on the passing of O.J. Simpson recently, they had a few episodes that were, of course, super focused on the trial and the aftermath and so on. So for an event that was so impactful and so broadly covered, wall to wall, in courtroom, on camera coverage, daily rundowns, journalism, news reporting, whatever that was. It was difficult for people to participate at scale. So it was really closer conversations. And this is from my memory. This is not, I'm not speaking for everyone. I'm also not, this is anecdotal. People would talk about it. It would just be a thing. Like, did you see Cato on the stand? Did you see Marsha's new hairstyle? Did you see the gloves? Did you hear what what's the guy's name? I can't remember. They've talked about the police officer who found the gloves and all of his issues, his problems. So yeah, all this stuff became daily fodder. Certainly not, you're not talking about it 8 hours a day at work, but or whatever your workday is like. But it was certainly something that it was a common experience because you could not binge watch. Again, nobody's recording 40 plus hours of courtroom drama and watching it on the weekends, hopefully. You either were keeping up with it or you were keeping up with the highlights or you were talking about it as, oh, I heard this, I heard that. But it was like a common unifying experience. There was no binge watching. There was no No, I watched all of season 1 of the courtroom drama. You had to actually play along with everybody else. So it was an interesting common thread that connected January and October of 1995 when the case ended in October. It's a long run. After the Rodney King case, obviously Rodney King got assaulted, and then, well, allegedly, no, the court case came out that he was fine. Nobody did anything to him. So the police were totally fine. The court case outcome, and then the LA riots, as they were called. I was in college for that, and we drove through Los Angeles post riots. It was a sight to see. There was a non-trivial racial divide hanging over the trial, over the city, over the region. Memories were very fresh. Anger, frustration, any racial overtones in the witnesses, in their statements, in the words played back in recordings. What is the police officer's name? I'm totally spacing on it. Will it come to me? I can picture him. I'm looking at him in my mind's eye on the stand. All of this was a factor. And again, even Alan Dershowitz was on some program, some video production on the internets. And he said, oh, absolutely. Well, the venue, every aspect of the case was permeated by this racial tension. They did their part to make it work in their favor. And that was what it was. The race card made a difference. And it was a real difference. And that's been stated and restated over and over. Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. Forgetting 2024. So remembering 1995 is a little bit easier at this point. Forgetting 2024 and starting with the end of 2023 has been something of a calamitous year, and it doesn't look like there's a silver lining on the horizon, to come up with my own metaphor. Local to global, total chaos, a lot of unknowns. What does recession even mean? Who knows what that, and inflation, price of groceries, the global geopolitical situation is crazy. The Trump trial in New York is getting loads of attention, although not for everyone, as we discussed. It's only been taking place for 3 days each week, not every day as the Simpson trial was, and is about to wrap up. As I already mentioned, it went for about a month. We'll call it a month. And it will have closing arguments after the Memorial Day weekend, and we'll see what happens. Oh yeah, I was going to say it's Memorial Day, but yeah, the Friday is the 31st, so it is this weekend. I just had a realization, like, wait a minute, is that? No, Memorial Day weekend. And then closing arguments, so we'll see what happens. The trial's been reasonably quick, but no courtroom cameras. There's been 24-hour news coverage from legacy media corporations and also from smaller news outlets, whether they're online magazines, Axios, Politico, the list goes on. And, of course, YouTubers, countless additional inputs from TikTok and Instagram, Facebook posts, commentary. No doubt there are groups of concerned individuals throwing vitriol at the respective players in the courtroom, actors, I guess, and their fans and so on. So I'm sure it's been a joy. And, of course, the Twitter platform, now sometimes referred to as X, the X Twitter platform, and any number of other sharing platforms and personal blogs and sites and whatnot. Ironically, that there are no cameras in the courtroom makes all of this something of a challenge, because you can't clip a dramatic scene. There's no holding up the gloves. There's no Furman. What's his first name? We'll say racist cop, because that's how he has come to be known. Furman. What's his first name? Anyway, so there's no dramatic Kato Kalin deer in headlights look. There's no that's the racist cop. There's no holding up the gloves. There's no hairstyles and suits and Bruno Magli shoes and picture. There's none of that. There's nothing. You only have like a photo op, in the courtroom of Trump sitting at the table. That's allowed apparently before the court is in session, and then they have to go. There was a little bit of scuttlebutt because one of the pictures somebody took captured one of the jurors. So there was a problem. So very minimal photos are returned to courtroom sketch artists. So we see dramatic, they look like pastel almost, sketches of the witness, the defendant, the attorneys, the process. So it's been something of a throwback, which is interesting. But the take home, without the ability to have that common experience, knowing the facial expression of so-and-so, the way somebody's hair looked, the way that there was a gasp in the room when some information was presented, or when there was a photo of something, defense exhibit, whatever, people's exhibit, the other one, whatever. So the presentation of evidence, the courtroom reaction, the tenor, the tone, the words used, the nonverbal communication, all of these things have been factored out because of the absence of cameras and, in-room reporting. So what you end up with is, after the fact, you end up with a courtroom reporter. It's almost like getting, back in the day, there'd be somebody running from the trading floor before all of stock trading and commodities and whatnot had moved to, 100% electronic. You'd have these trading floors, and if you've ever seen Trading Places with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, the runner would go between the trading floor where people are doing their little hand symbols. The runner would run to the phone, get trade information, post-trade information. So that's almost what's going on here. And this happens wherever there are no news cameras. You can't do, live or visual reporting. So you're doing something similar, but not every case is a criminal trial against a former president. So this gets just a little bit more attention. So you really have, through the day, if something dramatic happens, and they have an overflow room, so you have the possibility of I'm not sure if they've disallowed mobile devices in the overflow room, but you can leave, I think, a little bit more easily from the overflow room. And if you wanted to step into some midday reporting for an update or something, I've seen some reporting in that form. Certainly at the end of the day, for every day's wrap up, you end up with all the talking heads and all the punditry. And this is on the big corporate news. So you got your cable news, your 24-hour news cycle, heavily focused on this, obviously. You have a lot of opinion. The hosts of all these shows, you know who they are, rendering their opinion on things. They're being selective, motivated reasoning, being selective about which aspects of each particular day they reflect on. There's almost a sense, I'm not going to say which side because you can make your own decision. There's almost a sense that one political side chooses to report daily, sort of episodically, and the other side chooses to report on the story arc. So how does today fit into this overarching, here's all of the evidence, here's how it's been presented, and then the other side is like, here's the lies they told today. I'm not saying which side is which. So the big thing, another big thing, not only the difference between in courtroom cameras and no cameras in New York today, there are, I don't know that the transcripts are being published on any regular basis for the OJ trial, but you could literally pull up the video. So they're allowing audio and video to be captured in the courtrooms. You could listen to, in fact, you could listen to things even if they were stricken from the transcript record because they happened. They were recorded. So that may be something to examine. The New York court system, is it New York Superior Court? Or Supreme? I can't remember. I think it's Superior? I looked at it, actually. You can find it yourself if you search for Trump daily transcripts. They put out a press release before the court case started. They would be publishing daily official transcripts. So this is not a news agency independently jotting down the things that they wanted to jot down. This was an actual official daily transcript from the court itself. And that's a change of pace, as they said in their novel action taken for this court case, given its high profile, presumably. It's something that every court case could do. A certain amount of transparency is part of our justice system. No justice meted out behind closed doors in secrecy. That's the plan anyway. So the the ability for people to comment continuously, but on data that is coming out discreetly, that is in pieces, right? You're getting an official transcript. Whenever they actually publish it, you're getting statements made by the defendant after, I think, during lunch break, and then after, whenever he can leave the courthouse. So he is able to speak to the press, whoever wants to hear his statements. I believe he has full access to the social media company that he owns. So he's able to communicate within the boundaries of the gag order, which, by the way, is not an infringement of a First Amendment right, because you are a defendant in a criminal trial. You are released based on the, at the pleasure of the court, I suppose you could say. So you're able to do the things because the court has said, okay, you can do the things, but you're still on trial in a criminal proceeding. Technically, you could be sitting in a jail cell. So, something to think about. So there are no cameras. There are no real-time reports. So you're getting these like I said, discrete chunks, discrete pieces of information. So it's an accounting given by a reporter. It's statements made perhaps by someone in the gallery in the courtroom. It's the transcripts when they are published each day. And it's the interpretation of these things, maybe even the body language. I know they've had the courtroom sketch artist speaking now and then on some news programs. I want to say it was on MSNBC, but not sure. By the way, I have watched Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, Drudge Report, links to various types of reporting, various internet talking heads with very clear leanings, not necessarily the best journalistic practices, but so I've kind of captured a spectrum for my own. That's my disclosure. So they're not identical, but there is a similar divide. The population in 1995 was split largely along racial lines. Now we are split largely along political party lines, political ideology, and of course, even more granular perhaps, there are some people who are just simply, ride or die. They are absolute fans of the defendant, and there are some who are absolute foes of the defendant, regardless of political party, right? So there's a cult of personality split, and there's less granular is the political split. As an election approaches, there are people obviously projecting this into impact on the election and the outcomes of the election. So it's absolutely different, and yet in some ways the same as the Simpson case in 1995. So we have this fire hose in both the Simpson trial, which was 10 months. And I remember at the time, it seemed like it was the weather and the Simpson trial and sports. It was just something every single day that was not only covered and presented in news format, but also just a topic of discussion. And Greg Furman, was that his name? Anyway, the Trump trial being only a month and not on television every day, but is still a topic of discussion. People are really picking apart every discrete drop of information. So every time there's a comment, a lunch break commentary, whether it's the defendant or the fan club or whatever they're calling the various GOP future vice presidential hopefuls, perhaps, all the usual players, even the Speaker of the House came in and said supportive things. So there's all manner of commentary daily, but it's definitely not as pervasive and taking over for at least two reasons. One is that it's shorter. There's not a daily feed coming from the courtroom, so you're getting this secondhand reporting and third-hand commentary and fourth-hand YouTube parody and meme and whatnot. But also, it's just not interesting. It has to compete against, well, I'm not going to say it's not interesting. It has to compete against things that are much more dire. And so a lot of people, depending on which side you're on, it's being crafted as the end or no big deal, false charges, it will come out on appeal. So So not only is there not a daily feed, but the importance, the legitimacy of the trial itself has come into question for a substantial portion of the population. And so with an election coming up, it's kind of one facet of multiple moving parts. The Simpson trial clearly did not involve a candidate for running for president in 6 months, right? So drastic difference. But we do have still a lot of information coming at us every day. And I will wager a guess, you are not spending the amount of time that you should be on consuming and analyzing all of the news coming out about the Trump trial every day, especially given all the other things that are going on. So there are people who are paid, that's their full-time job, to sit in the courtroom, to listen to people who sat in the courtroom, to generate reports on camera or written word or both, or other packages of news and whatnot, background story on the witnesses, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all kinds of stuff going on. These people are paid to do this every single day. They go to work and they are working when you do. You're going to work not doing that. So there's no way that you can keep up with the fire hose of information. Like I said, we would come home from work with the Simpson trial, catch the highlights, talk about it at work now and then, mostly not. Everybody had their own things to do. So it really became at the time, and again, we were in the Bay Area, so we were in California. I went to school in the LA area. So the case was close to home, as they say, but even then, there's no way a person not in the business could, for free, right? This is your time. Take your time and consume all this reporting and highlights and try to figure out what goes where and who's telling which part of the story and whatnot. So with the current felony trial going on in New York, there's less real-time data. There's less like continuous hours-long video and so on, obviously. But there are tidbits of reporting, of actual journalism, strung together, glued together, mashed together with the usual talking heads and punditry. And, they'll have a former attorney of the defendant. They'll have a former prosecutor. They'll have former judges. They'll be assessing the way things were presented and so on. And you really have to go by what they heard. And often you'll hear, well, I read the transcripts. That's a whole nother thing. So if you wanted to really keep up with the current trial, you would need to read the transcripts every day. You're not doing that. I'm not doing that. So although it is interesting that they do publish them daily, which is a new thing, surely someone has argued, well, why don't they just put cameras in the courtroom? That is the nature of our society. But it's interesting that you now get a telling of a story, and they have to speak about what they know of each day's events. The credibility of the person that you are listening to or watching or both is something that you kind of have to assign. And because you have no courtroom you can't say, oh, that's not what they said. You pretty much have to go with, I trust this person or I don't. If you are interested, if you take the time to actually do that, you may say, I believe this entire company, this channel that they produce, these talking heads, I believe that pundit is credible. This one is not on that channel, whatever. You can make that decision for yourself. We can add independent commentators and so-called experts. So people that are claiming expertise, but are appearing on their own YouTube channel, they're appearing on podcasts, which I'm not discrediting the podcast, but there's simply more surface. There are many more options, ways to reach people and to share your views, opinions, and whatnot. And it's not always 100% clear whether the person expressing their interest has watched other reporting for the day, if they were in the courtroom. I mean, they divulge this, but you really have to pay attention to see, well, are you forming your opinion that you're giving us today on this podcast? Myself included. I didn't watch any news this week, and I've barely been keeping up, except for the part that I will get to in a moment. You have to assume that the person that you are listening to, the content that you're consuming, has an air of credibility, and that they have done the work, as the saying goes. to form an opinion based on, well, did you read the transcript today? Or did you read it from 2 days ago or last week? So are you current? Are you only examining today's events? Are you assembling a narrative from the start of the trial or before that includes all the various episodes, right? You can leave out things, which we'll get to in a moment. You can make assessments based on partial information. That's that motivated reasoning that we talked about. You can assemble a story with different parts, and it may or may not be true. So that's the Club Dumas, the ninth gate. If you saw the movie or if you read the book, I've seen the movie. I have not read the book yet. You know that the point of that story is that. So, how are you assembling your view of this picture, and are you assembling genuine pieces or counterfeit pieces, or both? Are you mixing them together? So I will say, oh, by the way, these people are being paid. So even, which of course they are, it's their job. But if you are watching a YouTube production, nowhere is this more true, really. And you would think it was true enough of when news media became a part of the entertainment division of different channels, right? It's all based on ratings. So if you're visiting a YouTube channel, they want to get likes and shares and views and viewing the whole program, not leaving early. So they really want to feed their audience with a narrative that will keep them there and keep them coming back. So there's inherent bias in the way information is presented on platforms like YouTube, and there are others, Twitch and Rebel and Locals and all that. So it's never been more interesting to be aware of where the news is coming from when you are consuming it and when you're forming your opinion. And as I mentioned, I tend to consume data, let's call it data, from a lot of places, and I try to assemble it into information for myself. I think I'm right sometimes. I think sometimes I miss something, but it's a full-time job, being aware of what's going on around you. And you have to be concerned with the objectives of the sources you are consuming. If they're in it for the money, they may be doing exactly what they think they need to do to make more money, not necessarily delivering complete and total unbiased truth. So you may be getting half of the story, maybe half, maybe less. While this may have been true in the Simpsons trial, certainly nobody was checking for balance in real time during the 10-month court events, 10 months of courtroom events. It was most definitely true. It is most definitely true now that you cannot possibly be checking everything and for two reasons. One, it's just every day, and there's just not enough bandwidth of the casual person to check. So you have to rely on fact checkers, but also you don't have the courtroom video. You don't have the almost like being there take. So you have to rely on a transcript, which filters out into intonation and sort of the emotional nonverbal components. And people just don't tend to read anyway. So you're not reading a day's worth of courtroom transcript, which can be pretty dry. So you're really left leaning heavily on the reporting that you're consuming. And you are going to, unless you are consuming multiple sources from different quote-unquote sides, you're going to get a narrative presented based on motivated reasoning and, maintaining an audience, feeding the audience what they want, and so on. Having watched most is not right, it's a good word. I'm going to say I've watched a diversity of viewpoints in reporting on this court case on we'll say both sides, assuming there's two. Like I said, there's an excessively pro and an excessively anti, but then there's the political alignments and so on. So maybe there's more than two sides. So if you consume different news sources that are either explicitly or implicitly aligned with those different groups, you can immediately spot a difference in reporting, in different styles, and different things that they will emphasize, different things that they will just leave out. I will say that in some cases, I believe there were 20 witnesses presented. Is presented the right word? 20 witnesses put on the stand, part of the trial for the prosecution. So the final witness was the most controversial perhaps, but there were 19 witnesses before that. One side will focus on the entirety or a more comprehensive view of the witnesses, their contributions and corroboration, the evidence that went along with that. They get much more detailed, and they're looking at that arc from beginning of trial and pre-trial and evidence and narrative and so on. And then there's another way of looking at it, which is let's pick on the one witness that was the most heavily cross-examined by the defense and so on. So there's a tendency in one case to look at a lot of the picture. I'm not saying it's 100%, but they looked at how the case has been constructed and presented. And in another take, you can look at today's events and focus on motions to dismiss and motions to generally alter the flow of the case, rather than focusing on the nature of the evidence and the witnesses and the total presentation, and whether the opening statements are being supported by the way the case has been handled by both sides, the prosecution and the defense, and what that could mean for the closing statements. So you can do a really analytical view. You can do a biased analytical view, which is what we're seeing more of, or you can do a completely biased, episodic and more dramatic view, which is what I think you're seeing on the other side, my opinion. So what you end up with is one half of the story being told in one way and one half of a story being told in another way. And it's not even clear that those two halves would fit together. And if you do happen to read Club Dumas, it might be Club Dumas, but it's not Dumbass. Probably Club Dumas. Or if you watch the Ninth Gate movie, and again, I don't want to spoil these. I enjoyed the Ninth Gate. It's a little odd, and it probably didn't do well with critics, but I find it to be an interesting story, which is why I want to read the book. I thought it was an interesting production in general. So it may be that in order to discover any sort of truth, and there's always different versions of the truth, right? There's what is it? There's one version of truth for each person involved, plus the real truth or something like that. So there's always going to be variations based on perception and perspective, and the elephant story fits into that. But where am I? Okay. So I have my notes here. So with Club Dumas, each of the stories may seem correct from your perspective, but you kind of have to assemble them. So that's, again, I don't want to do spoilers, but you may have to assemble the stories. One you may completely disagree with, one you may agree with. But if you put them together, you may find somewhere in the middle, or somewhere as a result of this assembly, that you see, oh, well, okay, well, that's interesting. So, and again, the whole Ninth Gate story kind of comes down to that. So this is not always a skill people possess. And most people lack the time, the inclination, or both. So not everybody's going to consume multiple sources. They're not going to allow their adrenaline to flow freely when they're hearing an opposing viewpoint or the other side, if you will. So you pretty much stick with your confirmation bias sources. That's right, I agree with that person. So your motivated reasoning is, I'm going to consume news sources that I already like, that agree with my views. I'm going to leave it there. So I think in this case in particular, based on what I've been watching, I think this is not going to yield a fair or even correct basis on which to make your own personal judgment. If the jury in a trial were presented information as it is being presented to the non-jury public, there would be ginormous problems. And it's arguable that they're always receiving good information anyway, because each of the sides in a courtroom have an agenda. But we'll leave that there. I'm not an attorney. I'm just my opinions. So the take home is that news reporting, and it doesn't always have to be a court case, but news reporting has an agenda, has a perspective. The publication, the production company, the parent company, the big corporation. So if you're Fox News, if you're News Corp, if you're MSNBC, if you are NBC, whoever owns them now, so is it GE still? If you are an online publication, that's probably going bankrupt at this point. If you're the Washington Post or the New York Times, both of those are losing money. You really need to keep your readership. You really need to feed your audience. So you always, as a consumer of news, have to be concerned not just about a particular trial or a particular incident of anything, but as a general rule, am I getting the whole picture? Am I getting the half of the picture that they think I want to consume so that I will come back for more? And I'll give you a hint. It's that. So good, honest reporting is probably to be found in an independent journalist with a Substack newsletter. There is still investigative journalism going on. It will occasionally have an agenda. It's sometimes easy to spot, but not always. So the question is what to do, because there's only more news. There's only more stuff going on. It's probably going to get even more interesting for the rest of the decade. Think 5.5 more years of this, at least, of more going on than we can possibly keep track of. So we must rely more and more on news. And this could be events in your city. If you're here in Las Vegas, you might have heard that the Formula One race was not as popular as everybody was led to believe. And that not only small businesses suffered, but sometimes bigger businesses. And now it's coming down to court cases, and there are serious concerns being raised about construction and how plans have been carried out and who was involved and who was asked up front. How much impact will this have? There's always an environmental impact report whenever you're going to do major construction and whatnot. And so I'm sure there have to be questions about whether that sort of thinking went into some of the impact that was felt by small and large businesses before, during, and after the race. So that's just one little facet of something that has nothing to do with upcoming presidential elections and the politics of court cases and all kinds of chaos. So only more going on. And so the court cases I've mentioned here are only two examples. One from 1995, which is a couple days ago in internet time. We've barely scratched the surface there, and that was not the point of this episode. I wasn't intending to dive into either of those cases, and so I really haven't. The take home, though, is that, and it's the same as it ever was, but more, that we must consider the news we consume as a version of some truth with all the bias and agenda. And if we are lucky, it is barely the truth. That is to say, you're really not getting truth. You're getting, and I'm not talking about a network of social media. Truth, again, is there's a version of the truth, and very often it is shaded, it is colored, it is manipulated, it is biased, it is leaning in one way or another, again, to service the audience, to make sure that the viewer identifies with, is fully embracing the motivated reasoning, the confirmation bias, and is there for it. Stays in tune the whole time. When profits are tied to the way the news is reported, you want to be profitable. You got bills to pay if you're a YouTuber. You got stockholders to be accountable to. Your fiduciary responsibilities if you're a big company. So these are simply facts, my facts, perhaps, but there are things that people have to think of rather than just taking any news channel, any YouTuber as an unimpeachable source of truth. We have completely ignored the inclusion of AI. You got to mention AI anywhere now, and especially generative AI, and how it will impact news reporting. So Google I/O and OpenAI have announced products in the last, as I'm speaking today, in the last, is it 2 weeks? ChatGPT 4o, O for omniscient, something. And Google announced at I/O, they announced Astra and Gemma, whichever one is which. And generally speaking, Google will be presenting search results that are AI generated, probably summarizing the knowledge graph. The knowledge graph is good, but for all these years of SEO, search engine optimization, it turns out Google has been saying, yeah, just make sure we can find all of your information. And the next step is so that we can train models on it and then tuck your specific website links behind the web option in our search results. You can tell I'm a big fan. So artificial intelligence, especially generative. So artificial intelligence can be used, which is my final point of this final section of this episode, which is already over an hour. I'm kind of amazed. I didn't think I would speak this long on this, especially because my voice is arguing with me as always. Allergy season. By the way, allergy season in Vegas, basically sometime in April, early April, often into June, especially for me, there's always stuff in the air. That's what I've come to learn in my 10 years here. So, fact of life. So we're completely ignoring generative AI, of course. AI can be used to classify, to summarize, which I think it should be used for, but not for generating. So summarizing is generating, right? But not for generating news sources, not for generating news from sources. Yeah, there you go. Such that the casual observer, the casual consumer of quote unquote news will stop at the generated artificial intelligence version and not even bother reading the headlines or the deck, the lead, whichever part of the paper, the article becomes the description in the open graph feed. But if people are no longer having access to the human or primary sources, even better, but they're getting a artificially generated through AI summary, then you are once again removed from what's actually happening, almost like you're getting reporting from a YouTuber, perhaps, on the reporting of a journalist who's in the courtroom of events that happen that you are not a party to. So you're getting second or third source information, and you may not even have access to the primary sources. You certainly don't have access to the actual events. So as you get further away from a primary source or from some sort of account that is unvarnished, like if you can get video, even that's not always free of bias or problems. But the further you get away from the actual event, if you were there in person, even then you're an eyewitness. There's all kinds of problems with being an eyewitness. But the take home is, as we allow or as we enable, without our knowledge, the prevalence of information that is created, that is sort of assembled like a cake, but you don't know that, we use rotten eggs in this recipe, sorry, then you won't know that because it's still a cake, right? So you're like, this cake tastes funny. But it isn't going to be as easily apparent. The more we adopt artificial intelligence as authoritative and we accept news generated by AI based on, now best case, actual, factual, with bias reporting. Worst case, AI news generated on other AI news, which is generated on other AI news. So as those errors increase you may get things dropped, you may get facts changed, you may get hallucinations injected. I don't mean to be like a conspiracy tinfoil hat guy here, but it is something to be aware of. The truth in advertising of news will only become more of an issue as more and more people are able to contribute to a conversation. We've already heard these words. They're bots, they're robots, they're automation from pick a country, bad actors from pick another country. So shaping of public opinion based on news reporting, where the news is no longer being reported by people in the population, is something to think about. So what I think what we could be doing is considering, first of all, a culture shift. So there needs to be the recognition that, humans reporting on humans is one thing. Generated articles based on summaries of other potentially generated articles without any disclosure of lineage. That is to say, where did this information come from? The internet. Not always helpful. So a culture shift, maybe some regulations or legislation concerning disclosure of not necessarily sources, but whether the source was a human, whether the source was proximal. Like, is this someone who was there or were they somewhere else? And they're reporting on something that they read on the internet, right? So some way of indicating, I almost hate to use this word at this point, but back in the day, it did mean something, the truthiness of a composition. We will all need to be more aware of our news sources, where they're coming from, which biases are inherent, whether they're using primary sources. there's a known but not always like generally understood concept of if there's a primary source and they are, say, interviewed by 3 or 4 reporting agencies, journalists, etc. Each of those journalists, or let's say journalists, each journalist writes an article. You have 4 articles written. Now you can write another article and you say, oh, I'm quoting these 4 sources. But those 4 sources composed their narrative based on one primary source. So as that fan out occurs, you may see the same facts get amplified and some get diminished. And that's where you start saying, well, we're only going to focus on these 5 things because that's all that gets reported on. And the other 5 things might get minimal coverage because they weren't shiny and interesting. Maybe they appeared in the second paragraph, but they may be just as important, but they don't get amplified because of the nature of this fan out. Something to think about. If our news is AI based, hopefully it will be summarizing primary sources, not generating its own version of some truth based on potentially other AI generated notions of truth. So culture shifts, regulation, legislation about disclosure of sources, and obviously you want to protect news sources. So I'm not even suggesting for a moment that you would out a news source, a human that's placed in mortal danger, etc. That's a different problem. What we're saying here is that you should be able to say whether the news sources, the sources of news, are legitimate, and that will come down to judgment, yes, but it would almost have to be like a SCIF. What is that? A secure, compartmentalized something. There needs to be a way to validate sources for some types of news reporting. That's my opinion. Like, I'm hand waving at this point, but some sort of credibility assessment should be possible other than shrugging shoulders and saying, well, I don't know, wherever the news came from. Ideally, we will all become adept at building or maintaining our own summarizing AI tools rather than relying on Google and the Google trained model. And by the way, anybody who's anti-Google could very easily poison the training data that, we're just scraping your website for current news and information content. Don't mind us. So this is happening with images that people are concerned about copyright issues. So they poison their images so that they cannot be properly used, I suppose, for image training. I'm not sure how effective that's been, but anything is possible if you don't know the training, how the training took place and on what they were trained. And I've said this before in the context of AI experts and things. If you visit your doctor or lawyer or any professional who requires some sort of formal education and certification, they must be a part of the bar of your state. If they're an attorney, they must go through some sort of medical certification and licensing review boards and so on. For doctors, if you're a programmer, you need to watch certain YouTube videos. No, I'm just kidding. There's no certification for programmers, but you could be a professional engineer. So if you're going to have someone build a bridge, you should see if they have their PE and if it's current and unblemished. So artificial intelligence has no such certification. That may be a route to go. If you know that some AI has been certified as trained on this type of data and something other than the Turing test, which has not aged well in the modern era, but some way of having some understanding, and this is probably more testing than is done on humans, but you're essentially creating a thinking thing where we're not entirely sure what thinking actually means. And if you're going to trust the output of this thing that is quote unquote thinking without understanding the path to finding the outcomes that it's going to provide, then I don't know how you treat that. I would have some very deep concerns. So if one can have their own summarizing AI, for example, like I have a model. I don't have a model right now, but say I train a model, maybe it's Llama, maybe it's some other. We reach the point where people can have completely viable, very functional and capable artificial intelligence, large language model tools available. I'm going to train a model and it's going to consume equal parts things I agree with and things I disagree with on each issue. And it's going to construct something with a basis in diversity of opinion or reporting. So I'm not just going to get one half of a story. And from there, I can make my own assessment. So there are fewer players in between, and my artificial intelligence model works for me. I don't have to worry about other people training it to do what they want. I don't have to worry about corporate interests creeping into it. When we reach the point where there's that greater understanding, it might be possible to have these cutting edge technologies work for us so that we might even begin to trust them and find actual utility in them rather than being handed what we're given, hallucinations and all. So I think there'll be the most of interesting times ahead when it comes to trying to figure out what's going on. And I really think that the comparison of that's why I did this whole episode, the comparison of these two trials of the century, the different ways, and again, there are far more differences between them, and there are probably more similarities between them. I've barely scratched the surface of the surface, but the take home really is this is the beginning of some observations that we all should be making about how we are told things, how we consume the news we come across, and how we assemble our own versions of quote unquote reality, and the tools that are available at our disposal today and what might come to help us do that. Given my background, it would be nice if technology could be used to be helpful. It shouldn't always be about taking our money and controlling our vote, our leanings, our opinions. Actual personal utility, making use of these technologies that people like me, although not me directly lately, but people in my profession, the general software and technology arena, they spend their time building these things. Sometimes the people in the cubicles doing the coding are not the ones with the agenda, so maybe some of this utility can be provided kind of at face value, and you, consumer of news, former of opinion, can use the tools rather than having them be used on you. Will this work? Probably not. Maybe I'm just telling you what ChatGPT told me to say. That's where I'll leave it. Don't forget, buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo, coffee.com, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo. Keep up with when. It's not if, it's just a question of when, and I cannot answer that at this time. I'll check with the AI when website properties will launch, and more importantly, when the MyMuni platform from the Innovator Vegas Foundation will hit the ground running, focusing more on local content creators to get things started. Why? Because local content creators that can be more easily discovered will be interested in talking about tools that are being used to make them more easily discovered. Viral marketing for the win. But the ability to discover things, diverse opinions, for example, is something that we're looking at as part of the MyMuni project, My Community, My Municipality, take your pick, the smart interface for a smart city. You should be able to find things and form opinions based on a bigger picture with more pixels filled in. And that's what we're aiming to do. Anyway, check that out, the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program, and there's also the Cafe Genius Impresarios program where I'm talking about actually building the business around this. The In Las Vegas platform as a starting point. The actual business that would be deployable anywhere is something else that also needs a website. I should really become a web designer at this point. I could be my own best client. But that's where I'll leave it today. That's what ChatGPT is telling me again. Have a nice day, and we'll catch you next week for the next episode, 27, in case you're curious. Take care.